All right, Giants fans, we are back with a brand new episode of the Big Blue Offensive Podcast. However, it's going to be the second edition of Jules' Short Takes. That's right, Jules is back with a short take. And not only that, I'm back from South Florida. That's part of the reason why my co-hosts aren't joining me this evening. They figured that I have been relaxing down in sunny Florida for the past few weeks. So they decided to take this week off and get ready and do some scouting because we know that the NFL Combine is coming next Tuesday. We'll definitely be back with a full episode of everybody being on the show, and we'll definitely have a lot to talk about going into the Combine. But for now, there's one topic that I sort of wanted to get into and bring up. It was in regards to a book that I had mentioned. And the author of the book is Brian Toohey, and the book's name is The Fix Is Still In. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you could see me holding the book with the author's name. I had mentioned this gentleman on a few actual episodes leading into the Super Bowl, and then I honestly one after the following the Super Bowl. And in there, this man goes on to talk about how most of these sporting events, whether it be the NFL, whether it be the NBA, MLB, whatever the case may be, the majority of these games are going to be fixed. And now, when you hear the word "fixed," you automatically think deep conspiracy theory. You're automatically thinking that, oh my gosh, how could these players who make millions and millions of dollars be on the take? It doesn't make sense. It shouldn't work that way. Well, here's what it is. They create the NFL or any of these big organizations, they create these narratives that can actually promote and actually has ratings that'll go up. I mean, these athletes' salaries are inflated as they currently are because of commercials, because of these networks that are able to generate these kinds of monies to be able to help pay for these athletes. I mean, you have to keep in mind, and one thing that is mentioned in his book is that it is a shared profit in all of these leagues. Now, let me repeat that for you. It's a shared profit in all of these leagues, which means that it doesn't matter if you are the Rams who just won the Super Bowl or if you're the Jacksonville Jaguars who are picking first. You're all getting shared profit from this whole organization called the NFL. Okay. So therefore, it doesn't matter what kind of product you put on the field. The only thing that's going to disrupt is your fan base. Right. And then we still stay loyal to our fan base. I mean, look at us Giants fans. We're over here diehard fans after having one of our worst runs as a franchise over the last 5 years in its history. And yet we're still there. That Meadowlands is still going to continue to sell out. Nothing's going to change. However, if you look and you just take perhaps maybe even this season into particular, or even as I mentioned on some of our previous episodes about how if you look at how when Tom Brady was playing all of last season throughout that whole COVID season, that was the highest the NFL ratings were throughout that season. And this was before the playoffs. And then enter the playoffs and then enter the run, and you get him to now match up against who? None other than Pat Mahomes, who's a big franchise. He's a big sell. He's a marketable type player, right? And that's just not even talking about his attributes on the field. That's just everything off of it that he brings to the table. Okay. And here what happens? Tom Brady wins the Super Bowl, right? Now we fast forward a year later. And we were, it was things were coming up. And as you can see what the author mentioned in a podcast that I had talked about on our show a couple of weeks back, how all of a sudden something was coming on about the Rams and how Matthew Stafford was getting talked up and how Matthew Stafford was a very good average quarterback throughout his NFL career. But all of a sudden he was getting put on that elite level. So they were setting up the narrative of at least having Matthew Stafford compete in the Super Bowl. He got his first playoff win. Then he makes it to the NFC Championship. Then he wins that. Then he goes to the Super Bowl. Then he wins the Super Bowl, right? It's very predictable. And here's how that, sort of fixed aspect of things plays into it. It literally plays into it because you'll hear that it literally will never come down to they're going to pay Pat Mahomes to throw multiple interceptions or someone's going to cough up a football or drop a big pass. No, those days are over. That stuff doesn't exist. Although it could maybe on some lower level type of plays. It's not happening in the Super Bowl. It's not happening when these guys are making millions and millions of dollars. But what can happen, and what's pretty much happens all the time, is that the league can come in, they can grab a specific officiating crew and say, look, in the first half, be a little easy with some of the play call or with some of the flags. If it's like a kind of ticky-tack holding play on an offensive lineman, let it go. We want to see a lot of scoring early on. Or they might say that in the second half. It's little things like that. Or they say, look, we know that there's going to be a couple of big plays. We want to see a big play get taken back by a flag, and we want to see a big play that could have been controversial, the pulling the face mask of Jalen Ramsey, but just saying They didn't call it. That resulted in a touchdown. It was one of the only times that Cincinnati scored in the entire second half. And then all of a sudden the Rams played defense and they came back, right? So these are some of the things that you have to look at because this goes on and continues to go on as a narrative is created, as the season develops, as the playoffs go on, and we start to see, all these different teams that can now have a shot at it, not just based on talent alone, but also what this narrative is suggesting. And that's where this comes into play. I mean, if you think about it, most people outside of Kansas City and maybe a few other areas in the country were sick of seeing Kansas City. No one wanted to see them go and play in another Super Bowl. And what was part of that reason? Some of the things that were fueling it, was it just Andy Reid and some of his family's off-field actions? Not necessarily. Did it have anything to do with Pat Mahomes? No, that guy's loved. But maybe it had something to do with Pat Mahomes' little brother and his fiance, who were all over the media, who after literally them coming back some miraculous play to beat the Bills, okay, with 13 seconds left in the fourth quarter to then push overtime and then win that game eventually. What's one of the biggest things besides the 13 seconds that's all over media? His fiance acting like a fool, mind you, and spraying these hardworking, high-paying fans with champagne at the end of that. They didn't turn around. You didn't see people celebrating it. Sure, maybe some might have that were drunk. But for the most part, you just paid who knows how much money to be at that game. You stood around all day long, froze your ass off, and then here comes some rich person who didn't even pay for their ticket, spraying you with champagne. Yeah, that's cool. That's something that the NFL wants to see, media wants to see. That's the hype. And if you notice, they literally were trying to make it so Kansas City lost that football game. I mean, they did everything to give the Bills a chance. That scoring back and forth was getting out of control. And literally, when Josh Allen runs for that 2-point conversion, that's supposed to be the knockout blow. How they came to tie that game in 13 seconds is still mind-boggling. There's no fix there. That was just some botched play on defense that just worked out in a way they didn't want it to happen. And at that point in time, the narrative now swung in favor of the Chiefs because they have to now come back and have this historical comeback to end one of the best playoff games of all time, right? Because it's just so coincidental that throughout this entire playoff, it was multiple overtime games. You rarely see overtime in the playoffs. Let's put it that way. You go back and you watch some games from years back, there's maybe one, maybe two. Oh my God, you got 3 in the same season? You have multiple ones in the season? This is just ridiculous. All right, now you almost have the same narrative where it was almost one in the Super Bowl again. It was just too much. They were definitely pulling for ratings. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, they have an easy first half. There's no penalties called. Kansas City's steamrolling the Bengals, okay? And then all of a sudden, the Bengals, who's this second half team that second half didn't show up in the Super Bowl, but this second half team comes back. They have this great finish. They end up winning. They go to the Super Bowl, and here we go, right? So that's what some of this book is going to explain to you. It's part of what I have been trying to say over the last couple of episodes in regards to it. It does give you an element. And here's something that I want to kind of go out and say nice and early, getting into the 2022 season as early as it is. I take a look, and anybody can actually look at this currently, and you sit there. And as right now, again, has to be barring no injuries, right? Because no matter how many of these calls are made, no matter how much there may be some narrative, there may be some persuasion from the NFL, at the end of the day, these athletes still have to perform. They still have to make that throw. They're still going against 11 guys on defense versus 11 on offense. There still could be a guy that makes an insane play, makes a catch, gets a deflection, gets a big sack. All those things are possible. These guys are still tremendous athletes that are going at it, that are super talented, okay? But they just make situations a little bit easier, maybe a little more presentable, maybe a little bit more favorable at times. And that's all I'm basically saying here. And with that said, one of the things that I took note to is that with Aaron Rodgers, now uncertainty if he's coming back, at least as of today, I think he's going to make a decision later in this week, and we can comment further on that as that unfolds. But as of today, he is literally not certain to return to the Green Bay Packers. Maybe not the NFC. Maybe he goes to the AFC. Maybe he doesn't even go back to the NFL this coming season. We don't know. So that's still to be determined. And as much as Tom Brady fans wanted it to be all about Brady and him coming back, I'm pretty sure the man has officially retired, okay? So that now kind of narrows the field. And when you take a look at the remaining quarterbacks in the NFC, you have, and I'm not doing this in any order, but this is what I'm going to say are probably the top 4 NFC quarterbacks as of today. That is February 22nd, 2022. You have Russell Wilson, Kyler Murray, Matthew Stafford, and I guess you even have to put Dak Prescott up there, who had some really good offensive numbers for the 2022 season, even though down the stretch he faltered a little bit and his playoff game was not that great. However, with that said, all 4 of those teams made the playoffs. All right. So there is a narrative here, right? When you're looking in the AFC, some of the top quarterbacks that they even talk about in the NFL and period, in Josh Allen, in Pat Mahomes, and now Joe Burrow, all in the playoffs. The only one that didn't make it that's right up there with that list and will be soon is Lamar Jackson and Justin Herbert. Lamar had a lot of injuries. Justin Herbert is still up and coming. That's a team that's on the rise. That's a team that kind of was getting close to the playoffs and they just fell a little short. But that's what I'm talking about. These talented quarterbacks are all around. This is the narrative. This is what the new norm is. This is who sells tickets. This is what the NFL wants the face of, right? Well, with all that said, you start looking around in the NFC, and who could be this fifth quarterback? I mean, you go through the divisions, right? I'm sorry, Eagles fan, but Jalen Hurts, look, say he sucks, say he doesn't suck, say he's still developing, say what you want. The guy's boring. His game right now is boring. You watch the Eagles offense and you want to go to sleep, okay? Yes, they made the playoffs, but they got embarrassed in the playoffs, okay? It's come on, stop. It's like, I don't even need to have this discussion, all right? You go to the Commanders, we don't even know who's playing quarterback for them right now. So they're out. Okay, now let's just go shoot right to the West, just because I already mentioned that 3 of the 4 Western team quarterbacks are going to be in that top 5 conversation in the NFC. But then you bring up Jimmy G. We don't even know if he's going to return to the 49ers. Sure, Trey Lance is there. Sure, there's a lot of promise in him, and he's got an uber amount of talent. But again, huge question mark. We don't know what's going to happen from that from there. So let's shoot over to the NFC North. Well, as I mentioned before, Rodgers, we don't know. It's uncertain at this point in time. Same could be said for Kirk Cousins. We don't know if he's coming back. We don't know what the status is at quarterback for the Vikings going in at this point in time. You can bring up the Bears. Justin Fields, a lot of talk. He looked okay at times. Looked a little good. Still needs a lot of time to develop. They need some more weapons perhaps for him, but he's not ready. He's not that guy to take the next step. You have the Detroit Lions. I mean, Jared Goff, really? Are we really going to talk about that? Doubt it. Okay. Moving along, Brady retired in Tampa. We don't know who's taking over. We don't know if someone's going to be a big quarterback that ends up there, but doesn't look certain at this point. You go to the Saints. I mean, Sean Payton took a year off. Jameis Winston, we don't know what's going on with him. A lot of uncertainty there at the quarterback position. And then you can go to Matty Ice. You could bring in an old school veteran and make it seem that he's the narrative, and maybe they get a couple of big free agent NFL acquisitions, and all of a sudden the Atlanta Falcons are on the map, and they could be that feel good story to NFC. And Matty Ryan can have in a year where he throws for almost 4,000 yards, and Calvin Ridley comes back and he has over 30 touchdowns, but it's kind of getting old. And then, of course, Carolina Panthers, which I'm not even going to waste my breath on. All right, that I will mention that they did bring in Ben McAdoo as their offensive coordinator. So, with the exception of that, that's his second chance. He's related with the Giants and everything, being the old head coach. It would be interesting to see where that takes place. All right, that moves on to what I'm trying to say and what this has been a lot about. Unless somehow one of these quarterbacks in this draft emerges and becomes a stud in his first rookie year and surprises most, and one of these NFC teams took a shot on, which I've been saying for the longest time, and I hope it's not the Washington or one of these other teams that are in our division, because that would not be fun. But they definitely should look into taking some of these quarterbacks, because if one of these kids emerge, that's going to be an amazing story. The NFL is going to try to make everything work for that player. However, with the emergence of Josh Allen, with the Buffalo Bills going from the team that they were, for them now, all pretty much that whole offensive unit, with the exception of Ken Dorsey, coming down with Coach Dable and becoming this new Giants head coach. If this Giants team could stay healthy, right? And listen, maybe they do, maybe they don't. I hate to hang my hat on the health thing. We've talked it over about 4 million times on this show. I don't want to go through it. I'm not going to say that that's the only excuse. But if they can, if Daniel Jones can give me 14 to 17 games this coming season, I think this kid is going to have a year that's going to surprise most. Granted, we need Galladay to be healthy, and Tony and some of the other weapons, and Barkley, and we got to get some offensive line. There's a million things that need to be added to this team before this happens, but it is far from out of reach, or saying it's outrageous, or calling me a homer, to say that Daniel Jones will end up in the top 5 as a top 5 quarterback in the NFC. Keep stressing that. All right. He will be a top 5 quarterback in the NFC. Again, the narrative is there to be created. If you could just imagine a turnaround of some sort, a healthy season out of the Giants and Daniel Jones, a season where the Giants now won 8 games, let's say, and we still don't even have a winning record with that, but we win 8 games or we go 8 games plus. And there's just this emergence where you see this team starting to come around and we're getting close to it. And this could be something that could really emerge. Well, that's where this narrative is now going to be created. Here's another young face, another young quarterback in Daniel Jones that can now start to bring this NFC conference back as far as their quarterbacks are concerned. And what better narrative could you create if this guy and everybody else starts to turn around and you start to feel that vibe where maybe in 2023, the Giants are on their way to winning double-digit wins? Oh, my God. Could you imagine we go 10-7 or something like that? That'd be amazing with Daniel Jones on our back. And then think of it this way. I mean, if you look at the early odds to win the Super Bowl, the team that's number 1 right now, that's the odds are against, are the Buffalo Bills. That's crazy. How is the Buffalo Bills, who didn't even make it to the AFC Championship game this past season, they're the favorites to win the Super Bowl after they just lost their offensive coordinator, their offensive line coach. All these coaches just got gutted out of there. Granted, I understand, I love Josh Allen. He's a tremendous talent. But they're still the favorite over Pat Mahomes, over Matthew Stafford, over all those guys. So here's the narrative that can now sort of be created. If there is success here in New York, could you imagine putting the Bills and the Giants on a collision course with Dable being the head coach here and McVay being McDermott being the head coach over in Buffalo, and just having these two teams collide? I mean, it would be a story that you could sell all day long, and a narrative that goes on and on and on. So what's the whole point to this? Obviously, there's a lot more to pay attention to as far as being a fan. Be a little more smarter when it comes to seeing how certain things unfold and how they just seem to always work out for certain players and teams and not so much for others. All right. It's just something to kind of pay attention to. See who, as the season progresses, what's more of a narrative, what seems to be getting a lot of hype in the media, who's always continuously being talked about. All right. And I guarantee you, if it's not Daniel Jones, you will hear a fifth quarterback that wasn't really talked in detail about tonight that will emerge as being a top quarterback in the NFC next year. Guarantee it. And they'll be in the playoffs and there'll be some hype around them, and not the four quarterbacks that were first mentioned in Wilson, Murray, Prescott, or Stafford. That's just something I wanted to put out there. Listen, comment below. All right. Tell me what you think. Tell me if I'm crazy. Tell me if I'm reading too many of these books and I'm falling into some weird ass conspiracy theory. I don't know, but you could definitely comment below here on this YouTube channel. If not, you can hit us up at the BBONYG on Twitter. Either way, subscribe, like, follow us. We love it. The more we can have fans following us, the more content we can put out for you, the more crazy theories I can come up with, the more Jules short takes there'll be. But until then, next week, tune in. We'll be going thoroughly through the NFL Combine, which will be starting. We definitely got some guests lined up for next week for sure. If not next week, in the next couple of weeks that we want to get over. Some are old, some are new, but that's definitely something to be on the horizon. And before you know it, look, guys, next week's already March 1st. We already blew through the first 2 months of the year. Before you know it, we'll be getting crazy for that draft on that Thursday night, and all of this is going to start to come into play. But until then, this is Jules. I'm out of here. I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.